If you're here to speak on public comment on any item on the agenda, please step forward to the podium and spell your last name for the record and your street or your city. But please spell your last name for the record, and then it's 3 minutes.
My last name is Kong, K-A-H-N-G. And today I'm here for the study session for the STIP and the BDZ for Colorado Plus. As we have purchased Valentes last year in June, and we wanted to establish that as our brew pub for Colorado Plus. And you know, we had our engineers and architects before we had closed on the building, and we were able to come up with a pretty solid bid. We had about 4 different contractors bid on it. Unfortunately, in old buildings like that, issues always come up: asbestos, mechanical, plumbing. You know, the code is really out of date. So everything, all the costs associated with the kitchen and just basic systems happened to almost double what the original bid. So that's why we're applying for this. We figure it's good for the city, good for us. You know, it's one of those where we're gonna generate sales tax for the city, and in turn, hopefully that'll come back to us and help us out with this project.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have anybody else here for public comment tonight? So the next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Joe DeMott had sent a text and an email requesting that we pull item number 4 from the agenda. We also have the applicant. He's filed an application, so we really can't talk about item 4 specifically over any different. So does anybody mind item 4 being pulled?
Just for clarity, they've filed a zoning application.
Zoning application for
which is
MUN.
actually discrete from this topic. Okay. I don't mind if it's pulled.
Anybody have a problem with pulling number 4?
We're pulling it because it's been filed?
An application's been filed for a mixed-use zoning application rather than this.
Okay,
So there's
I
no,
understand.
this was sort of a bit based on one case
Got it.
scenario, so.
So we've really changed the whole question.
Right. Anybody have a problem with pulling item 4? Okay, move on to item 1, which are staff reports. Mr. Goff?
Yep, no staff reports this evening. Thank you.
Well, be sure to use the mics tonight. Turn on the mics when you're talking, please. Then move on to item number 2, police chief. And Patrick? Council role in emergency response situations.
Good evening. I've got with me Mark Cooney. He's one of my patrol lieutenants. Mark also fills the functional role of being our emergency preparedness coordinator. It's been a couple of years since we've been before council to talk about emergency preparedness and how to respond and how we respond, what our plan is, and how we react in an emergency. So we wanted to bring council up to speed, since we've got new council members on board from the last time that we've done a presentation on this, to go over our current emergency operations concept, our plan, in a broad sense, and to also talk to council about some additional work that we want to do with you in regards to the formation of a policy group. Tonight's presentation to you, this 20 to 30 minute presentation, is really a 4-hour class that the State Office of Emergency Management provides to elected officials. We're going to try to cover the highlights in about 20 minutes. But the bottom line is, in an emergency, and we've seen one here recently within the last 3 years with our summer storm from 2.5, 3 years ago. What I learned from that storm is what our community expects is the same thing communities along the East Coast and Southeast area of the United States expect. And they expect a return to a sense of normalcy as quickly as possible. And that's a challenge for us. And given our size and our fiscal limitations, Emergency preparedness in and of itself is really a function of the police department. However, as Mark will explain in a little bit, we really try to share some of the responsibilities that we have with all of our other city departments, as well as our partners and stakeholders, both in the private and the public sector. The community, our community members, I think, expect the city of Wheat Ridge to have a vision regarding emergency preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. And really what we're going to really focus on tonight with this policy group is your role as council members as it pertains to that response and that recovery process. You never know when a disaster is going to strike, but you can almost always count on a disaster striking when you least expect it. So if you were to pull our emergency operations plan and look at that, you'd see that it's really comprised of what I call four primary goals. The first is to assess the types of risks that we might have in the community of Wheat Ridge. And those can be natural disasters as well as disasters that may occur because of the types of businesses or transportation systems that we have in Wheat Ridge. We also want to identify the availability of specific kinds of resources, and this is where Mark's position is so critical to any success that we might have, because we need to make sure that we've reached out to those public and private sector partners so that we have a plan in place and we have the resources and the contacts in place. And I'm talking about such resources as Red Cross or construction companies that can provide, heavy equipment if we need that, or barricades, or electricity, or fuel, and those kinds of things that are all important to us depending on the kind of emergency that we might have. We also need to maintain and update our policy, and Council may recall that in 2010, you approved the current emergency operations plan that we use today, and that was revised in 2011 and will be revised again this year to make sure that we stay current from a city perspective in regards to how we respond to emergency events. And then we also need to initiate and participate in training and exercises, and we do that both from a state perspective, we do that from a regional perspective, certainly with our other law enforcement and public safety partners in the Denver metro area, and we do a really good job in Jefferson County in terms of working with the other emergency management entities, both at the county and the local levels, in regards to practicing tabletops or actual EOC kinds of exercises. And what we'd like to offer to council in this upcoming year is the opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to visit, if you would like to do that one evening, the Joint Emergency Operations Center that we share with the City of Lakewood. And it's located at the Lakewood Police Department at 445 South Allison, if you would like to partake in that. And then the other option is when we have a training exercise event, we'll make you aware of those events, and you can certainly come and participate as an observer in those events, ask questions, and see how we try to practice this craft of emergency preparedness in Wheat Ridge. In my closing with you, the thing that I really want to leave you with is emergencies are really a community-wide event, and responding to emergencies really means that we have to have the ability to work with a lot of different partners, whether those are other municipal partners, whether those are our partners, emergency management partners with the county, the Red Cross, our school system, our other city departments, FEMA, the Office of Emergency Management at state level. There are a host of partners out there that we really strive to work with, including our faith-based community. We've had a pretty strong relationship with our faith-based community, particularly with Crossroads Church. They actually have teams of parishioners at that particular church who participate in an emergency operations response team, and they've gone to places like Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina hit, and also to the Kansas, Missouri area with the recent tornadoes that they've had there. So I'm going to ask Mark to go over the policy guide that we provided to all of you with that packet. And we also have another packet that we want to give you that is sort of a basic primer on emergency preparedness that is put out by Jefferson County's Office of Emergency Management, which is really a pretty good primer on emergency management. So Mark?
Chief mentioned the emergency operations plan and.
Mark, can you turn your mic on, push the button on the, nope, a little bit further down.
Okay. The Chief mentioned the emergency operations plan. I brought an extra copy in case you guys aren't familiar with it to pass around and take a look at. I need to bring that back with me, but feel free to peruse it while I'm speaking here. Chief also mentioned the emergency preparedness guide. This is a citizen's guide. One of the things that's really essential in emergency preparedness is make sure that the citizens are prepared on their own. You know, sometimes the citizens would count too much on the police department and emergency services, and when we're pretty taxed at the actual time of the emergency, so we're really trying to encourage the citizens to do their own preparedness prior to the emergency. One of the difficulties with emergency management is, you know, you have to prepare for such a wide range of things. You could, you know, your size and scope could be totally different. The chief mentioned that it could be a man-made disaster, kind of like a fire or a hazmat incident. Of course, there's been all these mass casualty incidents now that we have to prepare for that would fall into this realm. And then you could have the storms. You know, a lot of ours have been the severe winter storms, but as Chief alluded to, that July 2009 storm when we had the bad hailstorm coming through town was, you know, another area where emergency management plays a key role. So when you talk about the emergency management and the roles, you really have to prepare for all different types of disasters, but at the same time you want to follow kind of a basic framework so that, you know, you're all on the same page when it does happen, regardless of what it is that is going to happen. The other thing that's difficult to predict is it going to be something that just hits Wheat Ridge? Again, like that summer storm of 2009 where it was just kind of a path that went through Wheat Ridge and just a little bit of Lakewood. Or is it going to be something that's county-wide, or like the you know, the thing that the East Coast just had where it's, you know, several states involved in it. So so your response is going to depend somewhat on the size and how many areas are affected. One of the things that we've really been working on and was alluded to in the little guide that I sent you here, that as far as the state response is, what's your relationship with the county and the other cities around you and that type of thing. We've worked a lot with Jefferson County Office of Emergency Management. If you're not familiar with it, they've got a full division that's the Office of Emergency Management under the Sheriff's Office, where they have emergency manager and assistant emergency manager. They've got somebody that's in charge of their plans and exercises that just, you know, designs the different exercises that they do. We do our hazardous materials plans in conjunction with them. There's a fellow named Glenn Grove who's in charge of the Adams County Jefferson County hazmat team that we work with on our hazmat coordination. I attend meetings once a month with, it's called the GEMS group. It's the Jefferson County Emergency Managers Group. And the emergency manager from Lakewood is there, from Arvada is there, as well as the county people. There's also some private sector people that show up at that meeting. For instance, Lutheran Hospital emergency manager usually attends. St. Anthony's Hospital attends. A couple people from the faith-based community attend. Our recent project as far as working with the county is we're trying to make sure that we're ADA compliant on all our emergency preparedness plans. One of the things that we've done there is we've reached out to the assisted living facilities in town and made sure that they had their own plans. Again, as part of the community preparedness, you have to make sure that your assisted living communities have their own evacuation plans, have set up their own transportation when possible. You know, at the time of again, depending on the size and scope of the incident, it's possible that all your public transportation is going to be taxed, and you'd be best if some of the assisted living facilities had their own vans. They could take their people to maybe another assisted living facility that would be in partnership with them that would be outside of the affected area. So so we've worked on a lot on that. We've also worked with the county on who's going to be in charge of shelters. We've talked recently about if you have an incident that's going to require a shelter, does it make more sense to have it county organized? A lot of the shelters are at the schools, excuse me, typically, especially in the mountain communities. Excuse me. So we thought it'd make more sense to do it from to do shelters from a county situation. You know, the other thing about shelters, especially in terms of Wheat Ridge, is we've got so many hotels in the area and that type of thing. It makes more sense, just like in that that storm, October 26th last year, a year ago, or a year and a half ago almost now, we had a situation where we had power outages. A lot of times when we have the bad storms or, or in that summer storm or the bad blizzards, one of our biggest concerns is energy, the power being out, and so much of your community now has either oxygen machines or kidney machines or who knows what, where they need power. So one of our big concerns is power. Well, that October storm, we had a whole section of town, a couple of sections of town, one over by like 32nd and Yarrow, one around 30th and Reed, where the power was out for a day or so. Well, some of your senior community, and people that have these special needs needed a place to go. What we typically do is we would send them to the rec center if it's out of the affected area, where they can get briefings and information and stay warm for a while, maybe get them something to eat, and then determine overnight accommodations from there. For the most part, our overnight accommodations, we're going to use hotels. We've got a setup where we can get them a discounted room or something like that, as opposed to setting up a shelter. It is possible we'd set up a bigger shelter, but again, we'd probably organize through the county. One of the issues that you run into with shelters too, especially with when the shelters are in the schools, is the schools really don't like to have it as a shelter when the school's in session. So again, in our situation, chances are we're going to use more of the hotels. The chief mentioned that we've created an emergency management team. I have meetings once every 2 months where I have a representative from the Parks Department, from Public Works, from Community Development, from City Administration. We all get together and we just kind of go over what's been happening in terms of emergency management, try to get everybody's input, get everybody on board. There's going to be different teams when it comes to response, but depending on what type of incident it is, you may need somebody to remove limbs from the streets. Parks Department typically does that. Public Works will sometimes do that. Again, when since we have a hospital in town, you need to coordinate and make sure the roads are open to get to the hospital so people can get in there, so Public Works would help us there. So we have this team that meets and we go over things such as the incident command system and what their role is going to be in the Emergency Operations Center. One of the things that we've done recently from the emergency management team is we've created more of a call center here at the police department where we can give out a phone number over the city website and through any public information efforts and make sure that the same information is getting distributed to all the citizens that would call in. We have it set up so we have a phone bank basically, and we can set up a little call center and be giving necessary information or channeling the calls to the right people. And that part of when we get into your role in the emergency management, that's going to be a lot of your role in the initial response, is going to be making sure that the needs of the people that live in your area are getting communicated to the people actually handling the response. And vice versa, that what the city's doing is getting out to your constituents. So a lot of initially on the emergency, in the response mode, a lot of your role is going to be more of the information sharing. The incident itself is primarily, at least the response of it, is going to be run by an incident commander. We have a thing called the incident command system that you guys are probably all familiar with. There'll be an incident commander actually in charge of the response. Typically what we'll do is we'll set up a command post in the field. It'd be our mobile command van and it'll be marked command post. And there'll be an incident commander. It could be an incident commander from the fire department. It could be from the police department. It could be from Public Works or something else, but more than likely it's going to be either from the police department or the fire department, and sometimes it's a unified command. We typically do unified command on like hazmat incidents, on big structure fires. When we had that big fire at Kipling Village several years ago, it was a unified command because we had fatalities inside, so we need the investigation of the police department as well as the fire department. So typically the response is going to be run by the incident commander out in the field. The other part, there's really kind of three parts that come into play when we actually have the incident. There's going to be incident command, which is going to be in charge of response, life safety, incident stabilization, trying to preserve property is going to be the goals there. And then you're going to have your emergency operations center. As Chief mentioned, our emergency operations center, the one we're going to use most of the time anyway, is in conjunction with Lakewood That is, what it is it's to support incident command. So if incident commander needs a bulldozer, for instance, he might call somebody at the Emergency Operations Center. Somebody there would arrange for the ordering of the bulldozer and the documentation of it. You know, one of the big things on the emergency is keeping track of how much you're spending, keeping track of what you've ordered, keeping track of who's providing it. The Emergency Operations Center is broken into different, what we call EFS, Emergency Support Functions. And there might be one for documentation and resource ordering. There might be another one for law enforcement. There might be another one for fire. But there's going to be these different positions around a table similar to this that is each going to be responsible for a different type of support. Transportation would be one, again, ordering the buses or something like that, the transportation, working in conjunction with the county to get the sheltering. The key to the Emergency Operations Center is to remember that it's a support role. I assisted Jefferson County with the Lower North Fork fire, and so I was down there sitting at the Emergency Operations Center, and typical questions were like, what roads are closed? How can I get home? When can I go back in and see how much damage is to my house? Or the fire department might say, we need water and Gatorade. Where are we going to get the water and Gatorade, or something like that? So it's kind of a support role, but it also serves as the conduit to the policy group, which is you guys or department heads and you guys in conjunction. Like from a law enforcement standpoint, chances are from a policy situation, I'd be going through the chief, who might be going through Patrick and bringing it to the mayor and any policy decisions. And again, the guide that I'd passed out prior to the meeting deals a lot with what the policy group's role is, and I think we want to be sure that we're clear on that today. That the idea is that we want to make sure that we're clear on this stuff before it actually happens, because it sure makes it a lot easier when the disaster is actually happening. And a couple of roles from the policy group. One of the big ones is going to be finance. Where are we going to come up with the money to get these bulldozers or to get whatever equipment we need? You know, sometimes we think that if it's bad enough, well, the state's going to pay for it or the feds are going to pay for it. But realistically, the city's probably going to pay for most of it. The responsibility for most of these is local government. So, I mean, there are thresholds where you can start applying for some type of federal funds or something, but they're pretty high. Chances are I haven't seen one here in Wheat Ridge that's risen to that level yet. So there's going to be fiscal considerations that this policy group's going to have to make. There's going to be donations management. One thing that you run into with all these situations is everybody wants to help. Well, you know, it kind of becomes a political issue. Who do you accept the help from? And who do you say, hey, no, we've got enough help right now. We'll call you later when we need something more. You know, I've seen horror stories where people just start dropping off stuff in a parking lot. Now all of a sudden, not only do you have the debris cleanup from the incident, but now you've got all these, you know, well-meaning donations that you've got to clean up from someplace. So, you know, who manages it? And maybe that's a role that we have a private sector person take on, one of our churches or something like that, become our donations manager. But again, there's kind of a political aspect there. Are we good with this particular church being our donations management, or, you know, are we playing favorites? Or again, this is a role that you folks would play in that. The debris management, that can cost a lot of money, and how are we going to do it? The times when we've seen more debris management has been our tree limbs that you guys have seen when we have these either October or May storms, snowstorms, where the branches break. And again, our biggest issue with those has been the power outages. But afterwards, we have all these limbs, and, you know, what are we going to do with the limbs? Is the city going to set up a place where people can drop off their limbs? Is the city going to send people out to pick up limbs? Are we going to make the people take the limbs to Rooney Road or some other facility? You know, these are typical policy type decisions that you'd be involved in. Another big role that you folks would have, not necessarily as much as a policy group, but you probably do it on a monthly basis, is in mitigation. when you're approving different plans that community development is presenting and that type of thing, are you allowing people to build in the floodplain? Are you allowing there to be a assisted living facility in a floodplain, for instance? Well, what does that do from an emergency management standpoint? You know, if it floods, you know, do we have more of a problem now? So that's another role that City Council would certainly be involved in, is the mitigation. The other thing that we ask your help on is the citizen preparedness, making sure people are ready themselves, you know, like I mentioned, and you may have seen the top of the hour presentation that we put together in September, where we encouraged the people to be ready themselves and have their own 72-hour kit and have their own transportation needs met. One of the things that we ask is that with the senior community we have, if you know of a senior on your block or something that might be on an oxygen machine, to either check on them or else call us and let us know where they are, so that, you know, we can go check on them, so that if their power was out for a long time, we don't have somebody that's sitting there in the cold or that needs their medication or oxygen or something like that. I think that's the key points that I wanted to hit, Chief. Did I miss something that you want to cover?
I think, you know, just to summarize this, and we'll take any questions, the biggest issue for the policy group really comes in that recovery piece, because in that recovery piece is when you've declared an emergency and we have to have a plan and a mechanism, and the state provides that to us in terms of putting aside our normal fiscal procedures in an emergency, so that you have the ability and the authority, you know, to order up resources, and those can get pretty expensive pretty quick. We haven't really, probably the closest we've come to that, and we didn't get to the point where we got overwhelmed, was a summer storm in 2009, where the police department went on 12-hour shifts. We had an ICS set up, daily meetings. Mayor was part of those meetings, and I know I responded to several council people in regards to, here's the plan, here's how we're trying to respond. But if we had an event a little bit larger than that, it could pretty quickly overwhelm our ability to respond to it. We'd have to ask for the county to assist us, and then from there it's to the state, and if it overwhelms the capacity of the state, then the governor would declare an emergency, and we would make application to the federal government, and then there's a presidential declaration. And all of that stuff and the mechanisms and how that flows is all covered in that guide, in terms of how you declare an emergency and the different kinds of emergencies that you have. As Mark touched on, I think the biggest piece is elected officials take out of this is, we as a city are ultimately responsible to fix whatever is broken in our city. And there may be the feasibility of getting some funding, but if you've read some of the adventures and ongoings in Congress, the whole issue of providing billions of dollars in aid to the East Coast as a result of the hurricane back in November there is still all up to play. And they're talking about billions of dollars in terms of recovery aid that they may or may not get at different times. So we will also be offering, and I'll make you all aware through a memo, in our Citizens Police Academy, we've added a component, an emergency management class. It's I think a 3-hour class, 2.5, 3-hour class, Mark?
We do 3 hours. We did an hour and a half last year, and the feedback we got was that wasn't long enough. So.
Yeah, so we'll be offering that. So if any of you wanted to take the opportunity just to participate in that one class, we'll open that up for you as well, so that you're able to participate in that and learn a little bit more. It's kind of a emergency preparedness primer class. So with that, if you have any questions, we'll take those, we'll entertain those, and if not, we'll get out of your hair.
Any questions or comments for the chief? Do you have this in a PowerPoint presentation?
I'm ready for. I've got a PowerPoint for Davis. So. Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Chief, do we sequester any money on a regular basis to fund emergency preparedness, so that we've got a pool of resources to draw upon if needed?
No, I mean, not from a capital perspective. We do have an emergency management budget, which is pretty small. It pays for our portion of the EOC, and then training and additional kinds of equipment needs that we might have, but it's really pretty small.
So if we need to respond in a fiscal sense with funding to bridge an emergency, then we're looking to other pools of money, I guess, within the city or other resources that we might
Right,
have.
you'd look at the available dollars that you had within your existing budget, maybe your reserves, maybe your capital improvement program. Those are the kinds of policy decisions that would have to be made.
Thank you.
Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, we usually have some available liquid funds that we can get like the next day. We'll talk more about this later, but we generally do have, we have over 2 million now that we can put our hands on anytime.
We also have a ghost card, we call it, our purchasing card system, where there's no limits on it, so we can rack up some good debt in just for emergency situations. But we only have one of those cards, and it's in a very safe place. So.
I'm assuming that we have some kind of in-place on-call contracts for support services for, heavy equipment or whatever for that.
Yeah,
sort of
we do, the county does as well, and the state actually has a resource allocation program, so we can look to see exactly what other jurisdictions may have in regards to resources they could offer, and it's a pretty helpful tool.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Mark.
So we'll move on to item 3, which is STEP and BDZ for Colorado Plus. I believe that's Steve Art and Patrick. Just a reminder to make sure your mics are on when you start talking tonight.
Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the council. You heard earlier on from Eugene Kong, the new owner of what was previously Valenti's Restaurant, which will someday soon be Colorado Plus. And tonight they come before you with a request and some guidance with a request for a business development zone, which we'll refer to as BDZ, and for an enhanced sales tax incentive program, which we call the STEP program. Just to kind of give you a little background, you're all aware of the building on 38th Avenue, and it's a key site along 38th Avenue, the ridge at 38th. The development of that will certainly bring new business to the downtown core. Will bring new employment to the city, new revenues to the city. As Mr. Kong referenced earlier on, as they start their demolition and site development there, every time they open a wall or open an electrical box, new discoveries are found in there, which have increased greatly the cost for that development. And we as a city certainly would like to see the finest development that we can in the community here. It's been the desire of City Council. With that, they have come before you tonight requesting an STEP in approximately $40,000. That may increase because within your staff report there, we spoke about the fire suppression system not required at this time. That it may be incorrect. We have a meeting tomorrow morning with the architect and the site designer dealing with the occupancy of the site there, which may require a fire suppression system being put in at this time. We don't know, so we may come to you with a further request. Business Development Zone, the BDZ and the STEP program, as you well know, have been encouraged by the City Council. They made the Business Development Zone citywide, which then it makes it eligible for a project to receive back its use tax, of which right now they paid about $3,800 in use tax, and we can rebate all of that or a portion of that back to them. They would then request the remainder of that to be done as an STEP, and the STEP takes the base of a sales tax that has been produced over the last 12 months. With this, at this point, has been zero. So anything above that would be considered the increment, and they would then request that a portion or all of that be refunded to them over a period of time. So tonight we come before you to see if you would care to move forward with a business development zone, an STEP request, and some guidance on those amounts. Patrick, anything else?
No, Steve did a good job of summarizing it. As he started out with, I think, this is a key, I think could be a key redevelopment in our city and along a corridor that we're investing a lot of money in. And I think it's, we put several items in here why staff recommends funding some type of incentive for this project. As you mentioned, the building was a very long established tenant or business in the city that may have not done a lot of improvements over the years, and so today it needs a lot of improvements to make it workable in today's situation. So If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
In your mind, how is this request different from the prior restaurant request that we had in terms of looking at it from a city standpoint?
The prior, you're talking about the Walrus. I think they're both filling a need that we don't have in the city, and that's part of many of our documents that this council has adopted, the comprehensive plan, the urban renewal plans, 30th Avenue corridors, that we're trying to fill these niches of, sit-down restaurants that we don't have. So I think they both are equal on that level. 38th Avenue might be a little different because it's a priority corridor in the community that the city's investing in, and a lot of other agencies are investing in. So, maybe 38th is maybe a business on this corridor, maybe could be scored higher, if you want to put it that way, for incentives, just because of the current priority.
And is there, I noticed the staff recommendation, there's no specific recommendation. Let me try it this way. Would you think that this is a similar enough application that a similar, recognizing that we have identified 38th as a corridor, do you think that a similar approach in terms of the amount of funding is appropriate, making some recognition of the 38th Avenue status as possibly a reason to do more?
Yes, I believe also. Plus, it's also, that's why every case is different, which I think why every request is going to have to come to council, I think, until we get some standards put in place. But, in this situation, they're revitalizing a current existing building. I guess the other one they were too, and adding on to it. So it's hard to compare, I think. I think they're both very viable projects that need city assistance to make them get off the ground. This one maybe a little bit more. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly what your question is. But
what I guess I think, and maybe I'm asking you to more or less agree or find me reason to disagree, is that it's a similar business. I think there is a case that 38th is a more important location to us, but I don't actually think it's that much more important. And therefore, if we are striving for consistency in our approach, I think a similar ask is an appropriate response. A similar response to a similar question is what I think I would be advocating for, and be interested in hearing the rest of council's opinion on that subject.
Yeah, and I really do think that's probably more of a policy type question that council needs to make a decision on. And
Ms. Davis?
So I would actually agree with Mr. Reinhardt as far as I saw this similar to the Walrus project. And since I didn't remember off the top of my head exactly what we did with the Walrus project, I know we did both. We did both programs with that project. But I think more importantly, and I think also what Davis was getting to, was that as council, I think some type of policy and some kind of process so that we are equally, that we're looking at projects and distributing city funds or funding in a similar type of manner, I think is ideal, so that somehow it's not looked at as, oh, how this project was given X much, amount more. That I'd really like to remain consistent unless we have a reason that supports the difference. And I know, and I guess this kind of gets back to something I was going to bring up in our elected official reports, but I know at one point there was going to be some type of plan that was going to come forth to the council as far as business development plan, and what we were going to set up as kind of what we're going to offer to businesses coming in, a specific plan. And I think we also talked about housing and that type of thing too. But is that still in the works as far as setting up some type of plan so that we have, a policy to go by, so that we are consistent And I do think this is a great project. I'd love to see it on 38th. Beer drinker and would love to see it. But at the same time, I want to be consistent so that we are doing the same thing.
Well, and there's pretty good criteria established in both of these programs already, in the BDZ and the SDEP programs. They're laid out here in your memo. And, one item is to look at the potential sales tax generation that the business is going to generate. The second is the public benefit that it's going to provide. A third is the amount of city expenditures that may be deferred by the project. Does it conform to the city's comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances and other economic development plans that are in place? So we currently have some criteria. It may not be as clear as you'd like, but I think what you're speaking to, we were looking at a specific separate incentive package, separate from BDZ and SDEP, that would encourage housing reinvestment, and then potentially also specific commercial reinvestment to 38th Avenue. I think, however, we kind of put that off to the side a little bit because we were getting so much interest in both the BDZ and the SDEP program, and I think council was still trying to figure out those programs a little bit. We didn't want to confuse it by adding another layer of incentives on top of that.
So, and I know with the Walrus project, I mean, we had a great discussion with council, and a lot of it we compared with, a new business coming in versus a already established business in Wheat Ridge, and how should we look at those differently? And I guess, is it too much to ask to be as specific to say, for instance, that a certain amount of permits and those types of things will be waived if it's a certain percentage, and we could do a similar percentage or a flat percentage of that, and then as far as the tax dollars, if there's that we're willing to do X percentage of tax dollars over this amount or over this many years, so that it's similar. So depending on the business and the money they put forward, that we also, support.
Yeah, you could specify that even clearer like that in the ordinance, or just an administrative policy that city council will only share back at most 50% and no more than 10 years, or maybe it's tied to they have to generate this much in sales tax a year, or they have to invest this much in their property. So we can tie it to different things. I think it needs to be a further discussion with council on what you would like to tie those to. Again, I would hate to hamstring you guys too much where you don't have some flexibility, because I think every case is going to be different, at least for a while, but I think we'd be fine with having that discussion about.
I've been itching to try and think a little more on that question as well, and I would like to do it. For me, administrative policy sounds like a good starting point, because, but there's some work there, and I've been itching to try a little harder. So not so much because I want to hamstring the council going forward by saying it's got to be this, but if we set I think we can set more markers for the staff, and then say, hey, this is different from the baseline for some reason or other, and vary off of that, but gives us a starting point, which is sort of why tonight I started with the question, how close is this to what we did before for consistency? But I think there's work to be done there, right?
Mr. Stites and then Mr. Starker.
Yeah, we discussed this before. We're going on uncharted waters here, because we're dealing with businesses that have not been around and are new businesses, and I think we have to be extremely careful, and I think we have to be extremely careful giving up any taxes and fees, because one, that pays staff time, pays the inspectors to go out, pays for plan review and particular things like that. So I think we have to be, and then I think, I don't know, I think that we've only done that for nonprofits, waive any fees, if I remember right.
Under BDZ, the Senior Resource Center, the Reglera, which is it's a for-profit, the Walrus, and then also several years ago, the Head Start
Yeah.
program, and then
That's
more,
where it started, wasn't it?
more recently, King Supers, yeah. So it's been both.
So I think that we have to be, on a business that's non-existent now, we have to be extremely careful. And I do think we're gonna have to come up with a policy on what we're gonna do for a business that is not established yet, because we don't know. And I don't wanna be like the federal government, start handing out all this money and then have them go, zippy-doo-dah, but,
Well, and I think you have the difference between the programs BDZ and STEP. If it is a new business, you probably should just do STEP, because that's all based on what they're bring in. BDZ is upfront.
yeah.
So I think you have some room to.
Because to me, like, this project's already getting 60,000 from, Weaver's 2020 or whatever, and that's a considerable loan there. And so, yes, I think that it would be beneficial for us to go the E-Step way, which is based upon sales.
Future sales, yeah.
Future sales, that's right. So I do think we're somewhat gonna have to be extremely careful and get some type of a policy, because I think we're gonna run into more and more of these situations, especially if we wanna redo 38th. And then too, you gotta remember too, we're into 38th, $500,000. So somewhere along the line, we gotta get the money back on that over the years. But, yeah, I think that we need to come up with a policy, because I do see more and more of these coming in on a non-existent business today. So that might be the way to go, is E-Step. That way you can control it based upon, what they're bringing in sales tax wise.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Starker? I don't know, I got Bud, there's a Bud Williams that I know. Never mind.
Oh, okay. Either way, Bud or William works. I just, we had, and I appreciated Mr. Reinhardt's concern about sort of the, what the precedent that we had set, I guess, just going back to the Walrus project, which I was, I had recused myself on. But and we have sort of alluded to, I guess, are there other precedents back there that we can sort of fill our basket with? We've done other things in the past, and they relate to this, and I, some of it seems to me that we're sort of non-profit funding, and I guess we weren't expecting an economic return to the city, so it is more of a charitable gift, if you will. So that perhaps is some of the source of the funds that we do. But I guess rather than sort of comparing this project with the Walrus project, are there other projects that we can look in the past so that we have more than sort of one example to go back and say, well, this is the way we did it, and that may have, for one reason or another, have been a good decision, or
Didn't Recyclery take a step?
Recyclery was under urban renewal, and it's a TIF. So they're getting a TIF, both the property and sales tax TIF, and they'll be done next year. So theirs is different too.
But they were established.
And yeah, they were established building or business for sure.
Because I think we've only had one.
King Supers.
Yeah, but one project come in that is not established yet, of which was Walrus.
Yeah.
So
this one, yeah.
We have nothing to base anything on.
Yeah, but I think what's going on is that the STEP is based on sales tax generation above and beyond a base. So if you have a zero base, that's where I think Mike's saying, yeah, that's probably better for a new business rather than waiving permits and fees up front. That's just what so that's just an option you have. I mean, I think right now you have all kinds of different options because there's no policy set in stone. Ms. Langworthy?
Well, on the BDZ, the 3,800 he's asking for isn't permit fees to be reimbursed. It's just the use fee. So I mean, it's a use fee. So it's
Use tax.
Use tax. When you go out and buy something, if you buy it outside of the city, you have to give the city back the tax that what they would have gotten had you bought it in the city. Correct?
Correct.
So the use tax fee is really not, it's not something that we're using to pay someone to inspect something. So they're not asking for the permit fee to be given back to them. So I don't see a giant issue giving them a use tax, because as much money as they're spending, and Wheat Ridge businesses, that one isn't completely horrid. And the E-Step, I agree, the E-Step gives them that, you know, as long as they're in business, they can get the E-Step. If something happens and the business doesn't work, then they're not getting any more money. So they're only getting money as they are productive. But I don't actually have a problem with the BDZ only because it's that use tax fee, which isn't really used to send out employees to take care of anything. It's just, and it's really small. It's just $3,800. Compared to the E-Step portion of it, $3,800 is much smaller than the other $76,000 that he would be asking for.
Anything over $1 is a lot of money.
There's one section in the council considerations, in section 2, it says 3,800 of estimated taxes and fees for the project. And then, but then in the project incentive request, it lists all of them. 100% rebate of their use tax, building permit, and zoning fees. So it's,
It would just be the use tax.
okay, so it's written
That's
differently
in
in
error.
two places. Okay.
So would council agree that the applicant deserves to move something forward to the dais and then staff work with them to come up with an idea? I mean, I don't think it doesn't die here tonight either way.
It'd be great to have a new business along there.
Is there any direction on, do you want to make any kind of consensus on if you just want to do one or the other, or I heard there was some discussion about maybe SDEP only, but.
I'd make a consensus or try it for a business, for both, for the use tax rebate and for an SDEP up to the amount asked for over, did anybody compute, is that 10 years or 5 years?
That's another,
I was actually inclined to say, but I didn't know how the math worked. I would be more comfortable in the long run if our program said half of the tax for 10 years was sort of our target range, but I didn't know how that worked against what we had in this. But I would be looking, that's the type of boundary that I was sort of looking for over the long run. We'll never give more than half for over a longer period than 10 years as kind of a baseline starting proposal, but I don't know how that works versus what we're doing here.
That is similar to what we did with Walrus. It was a 50%. And it didn't max, it just was 50% for 3 years, I believe it was, with no cap. We did not cap that. You just had, at that point, did 3 years at 50%.
I'd be more comfortable if we aim for targets as a starting thing. Then we can say, we like this proposal or that proposal less than our standard one in some way, but we haven't done that.
I believe in this situation, this application, I believe they wanted to use the future SDEP for future improvements to the building and the restaurant that would potentially increase the sales tax to the city. So I think that was a consideration, correct me wrong.
Correct. They would like to, the kitchen right now is going to be a limited kitchen. They just don't have the revenue, right, the funds right now to do a full kitchen, so they would use a future for that.
I might go like with 5 years with, they can reapply after 5 years.
So
just to somewhat control it.
I'll tell you what, to keep it clear, why don't you go like one at a time, use tax first.
I propose that there be I'm going to get my programs close, a use tax rebate as requested, that staff bring that forward.
Is everybody okay with the use tax?
But not.
That's BDZ.
As the BDZ, thank you.
BDZ, use tax.
I do so badly with letters.
And
The dyslexia just kicks in.
Davis, you're talking just about use tax.
Just on that, the initial one,
Okay,
right?
so use tax.
Only.
Only. Anybody have a problem with that? Okay. Now you want to hit the SDEP and try that one?
You want to try, Mike?
Yeah, I would go with the consensus that we go with an SDEP of 5 years, and then they can come back in and ask for reapply or renewal.
Have you got a percentage of that 5 year? You want to give them 100% every year? You want to ramp that up? You want to go 100% the first year, 50% every year? Your call. Yeah, your call.
We never go 100%.
Okay.
My gut likes the idea that we should never go more than half up to the 5. I think that's otherwise we're doing it for free at some point.
What did we do is this a parallel to the Wheat Ridge Cyclery, or was that a different kind of?
It's a different.
Kind of a deal.
Okay, so that was a TIF. So
TIF,
they did 100% on the
Yeah.
TIF for.
It's TIF, but it's very similar to these. They did get 100%, up to $250,000 or 10 years, whatever came first. and they're gonna meet the dollar amount
Is
first.
that the initial deal, or do we go back and augment that?
No, that was the
halfway
initial
through
deal. Initial deal.
And they were also receiving property tax too, on that, which isn't part of this.
For clarification, then, can I just understand how that math works? If you're estimating 25, if just estimated at 25,000, that would be 12,500 times 5, 62,500 over 5 years would be the approximate. Okay.
Unless you want to cap it, you can cap it too.
But you're giving 50%, there's no cap.
Yeah, you could do both.
So you gotta cap it too, if you want.
Or even cap it not to, the request is for 76,000.
Cap it at the request.
Cap it at the requested amount, and if they need to reapply.
Or 5 years or 76, whatever comes first.
Okay.
The other half of that is that if they make more money, the city makes more money.
Right.
So let me repeat this, and then you guys can discuss it. The consensus was for an S-step at 50% or 5 years, up to capped at $76,000.
And they can reapply.
And they can reapply. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's S-step, 50%, or 5 years, and then $76,000 cap, and they can reapply, Ms. J.
The cap could be achieved in 3 years.
Yeah, it'd be great if it was,
Whatever comes first.
Then they can reapply if they, but yeah.
Will this sort of drive future applicants to make a bigger ask up front?
Good question.
Because we're gonna cap it at whatever their ask is, so the next guy should come in.
Should the cap be related? Should the cap ideally be related to the size of the investment then? Would that be the kind of idea you're pitching?
That's a good point.
There's some,
No more than
rationale there, I guess.
10% of the value of the investment? I don't know.
Whatever the applicant comes into at word one, well, now maybe that wasn't known, but, going forward, well, if you go to this type of a program, you better
Kick it again.
get it up there.
That's why you're gonna need some kind of a policy, administrative policy in the
Yeah,
future,
I
because
think
right
that's
now it's,
where I was getting to with the percentages, that it should be based off of the percentage of,
Well, I think there's still going to be some things that can't be measured. I mean, how important it is to you to have a new restaurant or brew pub so Chris can go drink on 38th Avenue. So that might be something that you can't measure, but we
Again,
can
but
come up with.
what we're trying to give you guidance on is where to start.
Yep.
And you could come in here and say, and so if we say, instead of capping at $76,000, this particular investment
Okay.
was about $1 million total investment, if I read it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so, so maybe, I don't know what exactly right, but the idea we have out on the table is you should start with the idea that we wouldn't accept, that you shouldn't come in here, that the proposal would be, in this case, it would be 10%, it'd be 7.5%, capped at 7.5% of the total investment, just as a talking point, as our baseline. So why don't we start with that, instead of saying $75,000 capped at 7.5% of the total cash investment into a property, and see where that gets us as a starting point to bring back to us. And then we can say, if somebody's, doing a home run project for us, and we say, it ought to be 12% or it ought to be 15%, this project just won't go. I mean, the but-for analysis thing at that point, so.
Okay.
Now that I've talked that into that.
Right, yeah, that's what we don't
Stice said
want
I had
either.
to shut
If they want 100,000, they're gonna come in and ask for 250,000, knowing that they're gonna get cut to, we don't wanna play games like that at all.
but for this project,
7.5% of the capital investment. I'm proposing.
okay, so
So you change the consensus now?
Yeah, I am.
why don't you repeat it now, because
I'm proposing that the total
S-step,
S-step
7.5%.
be capped at 7.5% of the total investment in the initial proposal. I took what they asked for and I divided it into about $1 million. I'm trying to match the ask. I'm trying to set the policy based on this instance.
So we're gonna make policy for the future based upon what this applicant came in.
Yeah, that's a flawed theory. I get it.
I don't think that's a good way to do it. What's magic about 7.5% as opposed to 15% or 25 or 2? Just happens to be we're making policy and this
We're,
happened to have that and you did the math backwards and came with that percentage.
It's true, that's exactly what it did. But it was based not so much on that, but that the assumption that we all felt that we were comfortable with that basic ask. And I said, well, how do we define that ask in terms of some criteria that's more objective than we like $75,000? And this struck me as an improvement over the, gee, let's just set it at $75,000. We're trying to build an idea. So I said, well, what is that? What does that mean? What is it we said we were comfortable with? And we were comfortable on this application with something like 7.5%. And then we said to staff, bring us back using this as your first try, and we'll debate and see how we feel on a 7.5% ask based on whatever the specific set of circumstances are. So what we're doing is we're giving staff direction on where to start their discussion, not the final answer to the question.
For this one or for all projects?
Well, I'm saying we're trying to set a policy broadly, yeah.
Ms. J?
One of the criteria that we might think about is the value of the business to the community. When we were looking at the Cabela's project, we were looking at the incredible value of bringing an excessive amount of other businesses generally to the community. And I don't know how you rate that, but it's an important part of this application and of all applications.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think that you're trying to set policy on this person's application. So I think you need to separate them tonight and do this one with your best foot forward, and then direct staff to bring forth the policy that you guys can all live with for the future. Because
I understand.
That's all I'm suggesting.
No,
I think we heard you. I think we'll come back with some minimum standards that all applicants can be based on, but then there's some flexibility for you guys to go up or down based on how you feel the benefit to the community is.
Mr. Vaughn?
Well, but first, we're bringing back this application.
Correct.
This will come back.
Yes. Okay, so then,
So the consensus that I have is to use tax rebate in the amount requested, just for the use tax, and then consensus on the S-step for a 50% share for up to 5 years, or 76,200, whatever comes first.
They could reapply.
And they can reapply. Okay.
That's for this project only.
Yes.
Does everybody feel comfortable with that? And then staff, we'll bring back some other policy direction
Yes.
for council, or policy suggestions for council to look at. Because you're right, you're going to start getting all kinds of applications for everything that under the sun. Do you need anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so item 4 was pulled off the agenda because there's an application pending, and it doesn't apply to this anyway. This was really for one type of business. Item 5, elected official reports. Investment policy discussion. Is that Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, it is. I hope you all took a minute to look at the proposed policy for investments. This is not a new policy. It's really a rewrite of the existing policy. It was felt that the policy ought to read easier, be more straightforward, and less complicated than it had been, and that's what you have before you. Basically, this is based on state law, on the reference materials, and to make it simple, all of our investments at this point are CDs and agency bonds. I do also have a report of where those stand now. Here, I can send some of those that way. But if you have questions on the policy, I'd be happy to try to answer those. And then you need some more over there, I think. Oh, leave me one. Thank you.
We got it now.
Okay.
We're good, I think.
So, are there questions?
Mention on this policy, we did a fiscal financial checkup of the city a couple years ago. Might have been before I don't know if before the new council members or not. And there was 3 major recommendations for policy enhancements or revisions, and this is the third and the final one. The previous 2 were the debt policy and also the unrestricted fund balance policy.
Yeah, one other thing that is new in here is a new committee, investment committee. And that would be, where is it in here? Page 6. A committee of, the advisory committee would be the city manager, the administrative services director, and a member from the community that I would recruit and appoint. Pardon me? Oh. Yeah, my best friend or no, I'd want to find someone that's can be objective, doesn't have a direct interest in the investments we make.
As long as it's Joe Naccio, we're okay.
There you go. Good idea.
I think we'd be better off to give the money to Starker and send him to Vegas.
Well, it's up to council. The treasurer doesn't recommend that.
Anybody have any questions or comments for the treasurer?
Mr. Mayor, I do. Mr. Schultz, for the record, you mentioned this investment advisory committee. Is the whole concept of an investment advisory committee new, or the setting who is going to be on it is a new?
Well, it would not be a commission or a board. There had been, under Mary Cavara, an investment committee had been formed. After I became treasurer, I met with them once, and they didn't seem to have a lot of interest. We invest based on liquidity, safety, and return on investment in that order. And there really isn't a lot within a lot of leeway that we have in doing investment. Under state law, actually, we could invest in some private, but I can't see doing that. I don't see it being any advantage to us. It would be legal for us to invest in city bonds of other cities, but there aren't any of those in Colorado. So I think our safest way is to stay where we are. All of our investments are either insured by whatever it is, FDIC, or they are with banks that are PDPA authorized and collateralize the investments, or they are in agency bonds, which are virtually faith and credit of the United States. So that's the limit of them. I would like this committee to help coordinate looking at cash flow, timing of things, how our practices affect management of the city, as well as an independent opinion to just monitor what's happening.
Mr. Starker?
Larry, in your paragraph on page 6 that you talk about the Investment Advisory Committee, somewhere in there, either it doesn't mention that you're going to be that the city treasurer is part of the advisory committee, and it doesn't say that the committee will meet quarterly with the treasurer. So I would suggest that somewhere in there we include the treasurer either as a member of the advisory committee or that the advisory committee will meet quarterly with the treasurer to review the policies.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is the investment officer? Because I thought the treasurer was the investment officer.
It is.
Okay. Maybe you could just clarify that at like a kind of after, yeah. Because my understanding is that is what you were.
Any other comments or questions for our treasurer? Larry, you got all your information you need?
That's all I need. I will, it'll come to you all for approval, I would reckon, next meeting.
Yep.
Any other elected officials matters?
I wish.
Mayor, I have one item if council doesn't have anything.
I have one too.
Okay.
Yeah, one, Joyce?
A program or an attempt to create some art on 38th is moving along. There's an art selection, there's an art committee, part of the marketing committee, part of leadership, to create a cultural loop on 38th Avenue. A cultural loop is a 2-3 block area of art, as well as perhaps greenery or something like that, to create a nice, walkable, desirable presentation on 38th.
That's through the Cultural Commission?
Cultural Commission is involved, 2020 is involved, Leadership Committee is involved. There's 3 groups coming together as well as the city.
Good.
So it'll be a pretty comprehensive plan.
Any other elected officials? I just wanted to let you know, I'm really happy about this because I've been working on it for a few years. The Metro Mayor's Caucus will be meeting in Wheat Ridge on Saturday at 7:30 to 1:30. There's about 30-plus mayors will meet at the rec center, and that's the annual retreat for the Metro Mayor's Caucus. So I'm really glad that they've selected Wheat Ridge, and so we'll be there. You're welcome to come and listen in. It's from 7:30 to 1:30 at the rec center, and they'll have their executive Metro Mayor's Caucus staff will be there, and it's going to be. I'll kick it off the meeting as the host, and then we'll be in meeting. They moved it up to 7:30 because of the Bronco game, I guess. Yes, so that was. And then I want to also mention that I met Casey today, our new county commissioner for our area, and we talked about some of the funding cuts that have happened in Central Jeffco. Really, the funding cuts, the $400,000 at the Senior Resource Center, plus about $140,000 for Jefferson Center for Mental Health, and $140,000 for Family Tree. We talked about, if he thought he'd be able to maybe talk to the commissioners, maybe restore some of that funding based on their budget. He's planning on meeting with their financial people in the next few days and see if they can look at different alternatives for funding. My concern was this, and I think I expressed it for the city, that the Senior Resource Center is based in Wheat Ridge. Jefferson Center for Mental Health is based in Wheat Ridge. So these are businesses and nonprofits that are in our city that employ people, and they're servicing a lot of citizens in Jefferson County. And so he's going to take a look at that, and also Family Tree, for the funding, restore it. So that was it. He was pretty nice, nice conversation. And we met at Sunrise Sunset. He made it through 38th Avenue just fine. So, Patrick, do you have something?
Yeah, National League of Cities Conference, March 9th through March 13th. I believe we may have maybe one of you has signed up. Nate just asked me to remind you all, if you want to go, we really need to start making reservations and stuff for you. So please get with Nate or Janice as ASAP if you're interested in going.
I won't be going since I went last year. So.
You're not? Okay.
So you can. I think that's it. We're adjourned.